And now to a tragedy of the Second World War. So few men survived the Sandakan prison camp in Borneo that it is considered the single worst atrocity ever suffered by Australians at war. Billy Young survived the Japanese camp, and 70 years later he's decided to write his own inspiring story. Anne Barker caught up with him in Sydney.
For Billy Young, life today is worlds away from the horrors of war. He loves painting as a way of remembering people and places. His only worry is running out of wall space to hang his art, though there are some things he'd sooner forget.
The jail here was getting overrun with scabies.
Billy Young spent 3 years as a prisoner of war during World War II, part of it in the brutal Japanese war camp at Sandakan on the island of Borneo.
That's Bluey Rollison there, that's Kenny Bird, that's our Alan Minty.
He took up painting almost as therapy, capturing his wartime memories on canvas. Now at 90, he's written a book with co-author and historian Lynette Silver.
Billy's very rare. He's the only rank and file soldier left alive who was in Sandakan, full stop. He's the only person now alive who has experienced the trauma of being under strict Japanese rule.
People have said to me, I bet you were sorry you joined the army. And I said, no fear. It's the greatest thing I ever did. It put me in line with good people, men who would stand no nonsense, whatever age you were.
And it was Billy's age that makes his story so special. He'd never have gone to war if he'd not been orphaned as a child. His mother walked out when he was 1. His father died in the Spanish War 10 years later. Billy was just 15 when he and a mate joined the queue to enlist.
The fella said, what mob do you want to join? And we said, the one that goes overseas. They said, that's the AIF. And I said, right, that's us. He said, how old are you? And we said, how old are you got to be? He said, 19. And we said, well, we're 19.
Hoping for a boy's own adventure, they joined the 100,000 Allied troops in Singapore. But soon after Billy's 16th birthday, the Allies crumbled under the Japanese.
In a matter of hours, Japan was to reveal to the world the monumental size and scope of its strategy.
Intelligence officers used to say to us, oh, these Japanese are nothing. They're blind, they all wear glasses, they're short-sighted. So when they came down, there was no laughing matter. They knew what they were doing.
Teenage Billy was suddenly a prisoner of war at Changi. With hundreds more soldiers, he was shipped to Borneo to build a Japanese airstrip at Sandakan. Their treatment worsened as the war dragged on.
Food was cut back to below starvation rations, and as Japan was losing the war, the punishment handed out was far more brutal than in the beginning.
Billy Young's paintings and now his book portray the savagery he witnessed, the lack of food and water, the spread of disease, dysentery, malaria, prisoners beaten, caged and tortured, including his mate Jimmy Darlington.
They made him kneel on sharpened pieces of timber and then put pieces behind his knees and behind his elbows and then trussed him up like a chicken for the spit with wet ropes which were going to dry out. He would have died had not Billy and his mates created a diversion and allowed the ambulance man to cut the ropes.
But far worse was to come for Billy. After a failed escape, he was tried and sent to the hellhole that was Outram Road Jail back in Singapore. He spent 6 months in solitary confinement, forced to sit cross-legged for hours at a time. Food rations were so pitiful, prisoners became skeletal.
And that was my thigh, you know. I look at myself now and I say, oh, you're kidding yourself. I've got a photo of Becky Sharp. You see him and you can see how generally most of the guys were.
The bombing of Hiroshima signalled freedom for Billy Young. Returning to Sydney, he couldn't wait to reunite with his old mates from Sandakan, but he couldn't find them.
I waited and waited and waited. It took me ages to find out.
Only 6 men of the nearly 1,800 Australians in Sandakan at the end of the war survived. Many had died when the Japanese forced them to walk as near skeletons 250 kilometres across Borneo. Hundreds starved, others were executed after the war ended.
The death rate at Sandakan for the Australians, 1,787 died, was 99.75%.
Some of Billy's mates from Outram Road didn't last long.
One of my dear friends got a home in Tasmania, and I was not home long, and he went into the orchard of his mum and dad's orchard and blew his brains out with a rifle.
Billy Young had his own demons to confront.
We had no one who understood the trauma, you know. Not then. If I'm 91 almost, there are still stories I cannot tell. I bawled like a little baby.
For years, his family knew nothing about his time as a war prisoner.
When I was about 9 years old, I did ask Dad a question, and I just got such a strong negative reaction from him. I just knew, and so I never raised the subject again.
70 years on, the wounds have finally healed. Billy Young has moved on.
He very rarely has a down moment. He is just so positive, and I think that his positive attitude has gotten him this far.
His paintings and now the book will remain a lasting record of the mates he lost at Sandakan.
For Billy and me, they're frozen in time, so we know them as they were, as 18-year-old kids, 22-year-old men. Age won't weary them, and it hasn't. For the two of us, they're still the people that left Australia as young men with hope for the empire and their country, taking on the Japanese, and who never came home.